On today's show, the Cavs have another long winning streak, and the Locked On Cavs whip around is back. They take on the Brooklyn Nets, Memphis Grizzlies, and Orlando Magic this week as they look to continue their potentially franchise record winning streak. We will talk about the teams they're playing with the folks that know them best on this edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. Today's episode also brought to you by FanDuel, because right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. The Cleveland Cavaliers are looking for win number 15 in a row on Tuesday night as they take on the Brooklyn Nets. After that, they play the Memphis Grizzlies on Friday and the Orlando Magic for a rematch of the Cavs' 40-point win a couple weeks ago on Sunday at 1 o'clock at home. I don't know how long this winning streak is going to go. Obviously, nobody does. It could end this week to one of these teams. It could stretch out, and we could be having this same conversation next Monday about the Cavs having won, at that point, it would be 17 straight games. I don't know, but I do know they take on the Brooklyn Nets on Tuesday. I talked with Adam Armbrecht from Locked On Nets about that. He's been a guest several times. Joe Mullinax of Locked On Grizzlies stops by as well. We talk about what Memphis has been going through because, spoiler alert, hasn't been great lately. And then Philip Rossman-Reich stops by as well because we're going to talk about everything Orlando Magic. The Magic have not been very good since the Cavs put a 40-point beat down on them. They did get a win over Milwaukee over this weekend, so maybe things will be turning around, but that's what's on tap this week for the Cavs. So before I get into my conversation with Adam, make sure you like this video. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure that you sign up for the Locked On Cavs daily newsletter, because it is your one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That is lockedondaily.com. And here is my conversation with Adam Armbrecht. And for real, one last time to talk about the Brooklyn Nets this year is Adam Armbrecht. Does a great job over at Locked On Nets. And the Brooklyn Nets are losing basketball games because that's what the Brooklyn Nets want to do. They had a near win on Saturday over the Charlotte Hornets, but they found a way to lose, which is everything that franchise is hoping for. Adam, what has it been like watching the tank race for the last couple of months?
Yeah, listen, I mean, last time we spoke, when you thought it was the last time we were going to speak, I could have come back and said, you don't know, maybe the Brooklyn Nets are going to be in the play-in. You could meet me again on this podcast in a potential matchup, but instead, 7-game losing streak, kind of what feels like, as Doug and I actually talked about, if you gave GMs truth serums of the worst teams in the league and said, if you could forfeit the rest of the games, would you? Like, would you just say, we're all set here? Like, let's be done with this. That's a lot of what goes on, man. When you come into a season knowing that, one, you're just not a roster that's going to win a lot of games. Two, there's a generational draft class coming up. It makes for a really long season. And the Nets have done their best job to make it entertaining and going through some streaks. Right now, they're riding one of the low or high ones, depending on how you look at a season like this, losing, like I said, 7 in a row and pushing towards trying the top 5 there when it comes to the draft odds.
So how has Jordi Fernandez handled this? Because I do think that there were a lot of things to be impressed by him early on in the season. And of course, he's a first-time NBA head coach, has been a coach for a long time, and Cavs fans are familiar with him a little bit because he used to be part of this organization here in Cleveland. But what is he doing? I don't want to say to ensure losses, but what looks different about the way he's coaching this team now as opposed to maybe in November or December, when I don't know that there was quite this amount of effort being put into ensuring that the other team scored more points at the end of when the final buzzer sounded?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of tricky because if you even look at the game on Saturday night against the Hornets, the play that gets drawn up when it's 102, 103, it's an inbound play from Zaire Williams. Cam Thomas loses his man from the right corner, gets to the top of the key. He's wide open. And he pushes into the paint like that. The play is drawn up to win. So we've talked about this compared to other teams with the best tank odds, Washington and Utah. Like, these teams, when you look at their rosters, they're actively sitting guys down that are healthy. They're not playing them. They're choosing to make sure that they lose as many games as possible. And then, ironically, Washington has now won 2 in a row and actually is at risk of maybe falling out of that top spot. The Nets haven't done that. Now, you can look at minutes and you can say, like, hey, D'Angelo Russell has never played 30 minutes since becoming a Brooklyn Net. That, recent games, nobody really plays over 30 minutes. They use their bench a lot. Noah Clowney came back over the weekend. Jalen Wilson, all these guys are playing 18, 19 minutes in these games. So that's a subtle thing. But the reality from a Brooklyn standpoint is they're a young roster already. And Cam Johnson was out for that game. There's no real splitting the hairs here around, who you're going to start or not start, or who you're going to play or not play. It's a young, potentially, some guys that could be a part of the future going forward. But a lot of these guys are retreads. A lot of these guys are cast off from other teams. So I don't think Jordy has done anything terribly strategic as far as trying to lose these games. He's gone out. His message has been, we want to win. We want to develop. It has cost them, especially early in the season, 9-10 over the first 19 games of the year. Like, it's cost them clearly in terms of draft odds. But the Nets organization has been one that typically leans on the value of culture and the value of not doing that thing, which is just plummeting yourself to the bottom. We'll see if it pays off in the end, but I really have a hard time pointing to clear game decisions outside of maybe, again, using Saturday's example to go long here, D'Angelo Russell's in the game. He gets them up to 14. He gets taken out. He doesn't come back in until about 3 minutes, 2:45 left. Is that enough time for him potentially to impact and win that game, right? Those are like the tiny little tweaks, but not nearly as egregious as some other teams around the tank.
So the Nets are as part of this tank race, I guess you will. And looking at the standings as we record this Sunday morning, I don't believe any of these teams play today, but the Nets are a half game ahead, I guess, technically, of the Toronto Raptors in the standings and a half game behind the Philadelphia 76ers in the standings. How important is it that they finish with a worse record than not just one of those teams, but both of those teams?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about, the difference between, the 52.1% chance to get a top 4 pick and 14% chance as number 1 overall, right? That's that top 3 living space. And for a long time now, we signaled to the fan base, hey, you're not going to be in that conversation. And even there at New Orleans, 17 wins, it's going to be hard to get there. But if you just want to maximize your value, right, it's an extra 5% here. If you get from 6 to 5 and get over Toronto in terms of top 4 pick, it's an extra 1.5%. Get to 10.5% to get up to that 5th spot. Every percentage matters. Doug has done a really good job on our show when we talk about this, saying, if you're talking about having a chance at $100 million, don't you want the extra 1.5% chance that you get all of that money, right? And and next to the 100 million is also like 90 million, and there's 80 million, right? There's these other players that are in the draft. But if the best thing is the best thing, you want the best chance to get there. So it seems like Brooklyn is going that way. Nothing would be more Netsian than for them to go and beat the Lakers, who won't have LeBron now. Like, this is the way their season is gone. But it is critical. And the funny part around it is, after Embiid went down for the 76ers, you look at them too, they know that their pick is top 6 protected. So they're pushing hard to try to be in that mix there and get into that 6th spot. Toronto, same thing. After the way they've gone 4-6 in their last 10, so they've been pretty muddled, but they've been doing the things. They've been playing their starters, and then they've been sitting a bunch of guys, right? They've been pretty committed to trying to drop themselves at the back end of these games. I find it fascinating. I don't think anyone's touching the top 4, and Chicago's not getting down into that mix either. It is these 3 teams between 5 and 7 that are going to have that conversation about odds and where you can land. And frankly, 32% at the 7th spot where Philly currently sits to 42% where Toronto currently sits in top 4 percentages. That is a massive difference if you're the Brooklyn Nets, and you could potentially fall to that 7th spot depending on how the last 19 games go.
It's hilarious you brought up Chicago, because as we record this, the Bulls are 26-38. They've won 4 of their last 10. They have won 2 in a row since they played the Cavs this past week, but they might finish with 50 losses and finish as the number 10 seed in the Eastern Conference because somebody in the East has to finish 10th. And it's an example of they probably should have pulled the plug on what they wanted to do way sooner. But it does lead me to my question with the Nets is, at some point, I don't know when, but at some point that team will be back in the postseason. How many guys on the current Brooklyn Nets roster are on the roster the next time they play a game that has like legitimate postseason implications in it?
Yeah, and if we're talking like I'll talk like 8th seed, right? Like out of the play-in tournament.
The play-in would count. Yes, that would count. Like being and maybe the weakness of the Eastern Conference complicates this question because like I said, the Bulls could lose 50 games and be in 10th, and like that would count. But just for sake of the argument, say finish top 8.
Yeah. If you're talking about finishing top 8, I think that would be at least you're talking about being 2 years away at that point, right? Next season, you get in the draft. You're still going to get a great player. I know everyone wants Cooper Flag. You're still going to get a great player. And then maybe 3 other really good players because they have 4 picks coming to them. Honestly, outside of potentially Cam Thomas, who by the way still needs a contract this offseason, and I wouldn't even guarantee that. I don't know if Noah Clowney would definitely probably be in that group because he's young, he's shown it, he had the injury. That would really be a consideration there. The guys under contract like Claxton, if he can stay through it, though there's been some conversations about whether or not he should be on this roster. I would set the over under on that probably at 1.5. Like if I wanted to be fun about it, maybe 2.5, but I think 1.5 is the over under on players on this roster that play meaningful basketball games 2 seasons from now for the Nets, for the Brooklyn Nets. Yeah.
Well, at some point it will happen. I don't know when, but the Nets will be back in playoff contention at some point. Until then, you're rooting for ping pong balls. Adam, thanks so much for doing this, man, and good luck in the draft lottery when it gets here.
Hey, anytime. Maybe we'll meet again down the road in the playoffs.
Today's show brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready because when they swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. That's not today because no player dropped 50 last night, but it could happen on Monday night. You never know, and you could be saving pretty big on Tuesday. So when any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 2024-2025 NBA regular season, that's this one, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order up to $10 off the next day from noon until midnight. So maybe you're going to be staying up late, waiting to see, hey, who is going to go for 50? Is something going to happen on the West Coast? I'm on the East Coast. I don't want to miss that, right? You could be staying up late. That could be your thing. And that means you don't have lunch ready for work the next day. Well, that is where you can save, because if someone does score 50 or more points, all you have to do is use promo code NBA50, that is NBA50, from noon until midnight the next day after a 50-point game to get 50% off an order the next day up to $10 off. So sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save, because like I said, when any player scores 50 or more in a game, you get 50% off an order the next day up to $10 off with Dash Pass. So what you need to do, again, use promo code NBA50, that is NBA50, from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms do apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. And back for the second time in 3 weeks, Joe Mullinax from Locked On Grizzlies does a great job down there covering the team that, as we record this, 4th in the Western Conference, have not played their best basketball since the Grizzlies came up to Cleveland and lost a close game. I believe they have 1 or maybe 2 wins since then, including a win over the Dallas Mavericks, who are the worst situation I've ever seen. But Joe, what's been going on with Memphis lately?
Well, they're without their MVP right now, Jaren Jackson Jr. And Ja Morant is the superstar. He gets the headlines, but Jaren is the all-NBA player this year. Jaren is the one who's kind of stirred the drink when the team's really playing well, and he's out with an ankle injury. He's week to week, so it's certainly possible by Friday, I believe it is, when the Grizzlies play the Cavs. Certainly possible that Jaren will be on the court for that. I hope he is, because I'll be in Memphis for that game. Excited to be in FedEx Forum for Grizzlies Cavs coming up this coming weekend. Jaren's the main reason, but to be fair, even when Jaren was in, the Grizzlies have played really piss poor defense, to be honest with you, for a while. Since basically January 1st, they're among the top 5 worst defenses in the entire NBA. And that is out of character for a Taylor Jenkins team. The offensive issues that have happened in the past, those seem to be gone. They're still a top 10 offense, even with the recent skid. But it's the defense that has really failed them. They're giving up lots of open threes. That's kind of part of the scheme. But teams are hitting them more consistently, and there really hasn't been much attempts to adjust and adapt. And that's one of the biggest criticisms of Jenkins. So his seat is a little bit warm. I know we'll talk more about the playoffs and that sort of thing. If this team doesn't succeed in the postseason, I think pretty drastic changes are coming to the coaching staff.
So we will get to that in a second, but you mentioned with the Jaren Jackson Jr. injury, and we don't know if he'll be able to play on Friday when the Cavs are in Memphis, but I am curious, what end of the floor do you think that affects them more? Because defensively, you're right, they haven't been great since January 1st. Obviously, he hasn't missed all of that time. Like, he's only missed a handful of games at this point. Do you think that they miss him more offensively or defensively,
Right.
which really I think is a compliment to his game, because he was one of the favorites along with Evan Mobley for Defensive Player of the Year after Victor Wembanyama went down. But I think that the impact that he's had all season on the offensive end probably doesn't get talked about enough too.
He's one of the best isolation scorers in the NBA per possession. And I think that right now, hilariously, they miss him more offensively. Santi Aldama has also been in and out of the rotation, and he's had a decent to good season for the Grizzlies. So they've been missing some of the guys that can create their own shots, that can hit threes on the perimeter. That has made them depend on players like Luke Kennard, who obviously is one of the best three-point shooters there is in the NBA, but he's much more limited in terms of, can he make his own shot? Can he deal with physicality on the perimeter? The Cavs have several guys that'll defend and check him pretty effectively outside. If DeAndre Hunter is on him, good Lord, there's never going to be an open three for Luke. So I think that with Jaren out, the natural instinct is to say, since he's a former Defensive Player of the Year, you're right, he's one of the front runners now. Mobley's having a tremendous year too, certainly not taking away from him. But Jaren was the betting favorite, I believe, once Wembanyama went down. It's offense, his ability to score when the team needs him to score. I've called him Giannis Light on numerous occasions because he's a mismatch hunter now. If you put a true big on him, he's 6'11", 245, but he has a good enough handle and he's athletic enough where he can get past most fives. If you put a 4 on him, not many 4s are as big as he is. So it's often a size mismatch, and he can take him in the post, if he gets to his left hand, more often than not, it's a bucket. So I think the Grizzlies miss him offensively right now, especially when their motion style offense is not having the success that they need it to. He's a guy that can go and get a shot. And one of the misconceptions about Ja Morant is he's this great isolation scorer, and he's not. He's very good in closing moments. He's one of the best closers in the NBA, but he struggles in those ISO spots. And that's something where Jaren really thrives, and that's a major difference between the two.
So since these two teams last saw each other in Cleveland on February 23rd, Memphis is 2-4 in their last 6 games. Now, we are recording this on Sunday afternoon before Memphis takes on New Orleans. They play Phoenix on Monday night, and then they play Utah on Wednesday before they see the Cavs again on Friday. So that it could very much look like a little bit of a different story by the time these two teams play again. But are you concerned, or do you think that there is concern that this is a team that could ultimately fall out of the top 4 in the Western Conference and have to play game 1 of a first-round series on the road in the postseason?
Absolutely. I don't know how you could say otherwise. Oklahoma City is the class, right? They are the very best of the West. Everybody else is chasing them. From there, Nuggets, Lakers, depending on how long LeBron is out, the Grizzlies, Rockets, those teams are really kind of the next tier up. And if Memphis isn't able to get their stuff together and put together some wins against teams that they're supposed to beat, it was pretty cut. We were cutting it close against the Dallas Mavericks on Friday night. And the Grizzlies somehow still covered the spread in that game, but Dallas was up for a considerable amount of that contest. And they were playing a skeleton crew. I think Max Christie might've been the best player that they played that game. So it's one of those spots where Memphis, if they don't take care of the games, the Pelicans on Sunday, the Suns on Monday, if they don't win the games against the teams behind them right now in the standings, when they come to games like Cleveland, who is a better team than them, those games become closer to must wins than they should be because they aren't taking care of the business that they had up in front of them. And that is something that Memphis has been really good at this season. They have beaten the teams that they're supposed to beat more so than at any other point since I've covered the team, but that has trailed off a little bit in the last month or so.
So you mentioned Taylor Jenkins and his job security. And of course, Taylor, I think throughout his tenure has done a really good job with the Memphis Grizzlies, but that seat could be getting a little warmer, especially with this recent slide that the team on. What do you think needs to happen in the postseason for him to be back next year as head coach in Memphis?
They need to win at least a first round series. If they lose in the first round, he's gone. And I think that the biggest thing for him, he's such a good development coach, and he has a wonderful developmental staff around him. And I also think that he, we mentioned earlier the defense. He's been very strong defensively in the past. The larger sample size of the last 6 years is bigger than, the last 2 months. But it's the adaptability, it's the adjustments, it's the stubbornness, to be honest with you. He still plays 11-man rotations when he has Jaren Jackson Jr. and Santi Aldama out. What does that mean? That means John Conchar is playing. And John Conchar is a fine end of rotation, breaking case of emergency guy, but he shouldn't be in that position. You should be condensing the rotation at this point. You should be playing guys less that are role players like that. Now, to his credit, Desmond Bane, Ja Morant, they've seen their minutes, and Jaren before he got hurt, their minutes have been creeping up as the season has extended, but he's still playing too many rotation guys. We mentioned the defense lack of adjustments when there's open threes, just basically letting that happen. Offensively, Ja Morant has struggled in this new scheme. Lots of other guys are having career years. So the scheme is working, but your most explosive offensive player, the one who makes everybody around him better, which Jaren Jackson Jr. does not necessarily do because he's not the best facilitator of offense. He facilitates his own offense, but if you look at his assist numbers, Jaren, that's a major weakness in his game. And you see more and more teams kind of double teaming him once he gets into his drives because they know he's not going to pass out of it. John Morant can pass at any point. I'd say only Trae Young is really better at passing the basketball than Ja in the NBA, maybe Jokic. For me, it's a situation where if he can't adapt, they're going to lose. And if they're going to lose because they're predictable, then it's almost like a Mark Jackson and Golden State situation where the next guy is going to come in and kind of take advantage of all the developmental work that you did because you weren't able to adjust your scheme and be able to reach these guys and get them where they need to go. The Grizzlies are still one of the youngest rosters in the NBA. That's important to point out. Ja and Jaren are both 25. Dez is 26. But they're entering their primes, and all three of them are making 9-figure contracts. If you can't get out of the first round with three guys that combined make almost $500 million, what are we talking about? It's time to try something different.
Some would call it Mark Jackson and Golden State. Others might call it JB Bickerstaff being fired and Kenny Atkinson being hired in Cleveland. I mean, that could be the blueprint everyone's talking about too.
Which ironically, JB Bickerstaff was fired from the Grizzlies. So.
Right. That is exactly what has happened in Cleveland, but we'll see what happens in round 2 between Cavs and Grizzlies on Friday night in Memphis. Joe, thanks so much for doing this, man.
Happy to have you. Thankful for being here. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Today's show brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel is, of course, America's #1 sportsbook, and March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers at FanDuel can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. It's $200 extra dollars to use on everything from buzzer beaters, Cinderella stories, conference tournaments, all of it, even who's going to be cutting down the nets at the end. All you have to do, win that first $5 bet, and $200 in bonus bets could be yours. Maybe you have your eye on a few underdogs. I don't know. Maybe you have your eye on the favorites. Can't go wrong there, right? Chalk sometimes wins in the tournament, but you can back it with spreads, totals, game props, all of it. Plus, tournament games happening almost every day. So there's almost always something to bet on during this month. And the FanDuel app is very simple to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly and there's no waiting around. You're going to get your money. So what you need to do is visit FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com, and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long because, like I said, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Again, go to FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com to sign up today. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. He is back. Philip Rossman-Reich here to talk about the Orlando Magic. Last time we talked about these two teams, the Cavs handed the Magic a 40-point loss in Orlando. Orlando now visits Cleveland for a 1 o'clock primetime ABC showcase on Sunday afternoon. Philip, Orlando went into a bit of a tailspin, I guess, after that Cavs loss where they did lose their next 4 games, but they are coming off as we record this. They won their last game, a victory over the Milwaukee Bucks. So they have that in common with the Cavs. They've both won their last game against Milwaukee. But what looked better in that game for the Magic than the 5-game losing streak that went right before it?
I think the biggest thing is just intention. Like, the Magic went into a little bit of tailspin after that loss to Cleveland, but they lost those next 4 games all by 1 possession. The Golden State game ended up being like a 5-point game, but it all came down to the last possession. So, you're looking at close games where make a shot, miss a shot, the result changes and the vibes are just completely different. Now, granted, 2 of those losses were to Toronto, 1 to Chicago. Those are losses that the Magic really can't afford to take, wins they need to get in the race that they're in right now for the play-in spot. But against Milwaukee on Saturday, there was just a lot more intention, detail to the game plan. They made shots, which sure helps. And then they were able to execute down the stretch and be able to make some plays that they weren't making on their home floor. So the hope is, and I don't know when this is coming out because the Magic play the Rockets on Monday. The hope is that getting that win relieves some of the tension and pressure to get a win, and they start playing like freer and looser and able to execute better.
So you dropped a stat on me before we started recording that in the last 3 games, the Orlando Magic have an offensive rating above 115, which is, if you watch the NBA, nothing to write home about. If you watch the Orlando Magic, that's a big deal. It's the first time you said they've done that since the month of November, which if you're looking at your calendar, it's March 10th right now. So it's been a really long time since they've had an average offense for a stretch of 3 games. What has worked well for their offense during that stretch? Like, what has made it look like a palatable NBA offense to watch?
I think the big thing, and this is what all the internet folks are gonna point at, Paolo Banchero is starting to get back to form. He played the first 5 games. He averaged 29 points per game, was a bit of a triple-double threat, had the 50-point game, and then tore his oblique. And he came back, and he had some nice games here and there, but it was just really inconsistent. He'd have a really good game. He came out, had, I think, 34 against Milwaukee in his first game back, dropped back down to 21, and then was having these like 19-point games, shooting, maybe going 9 for 19 or 9 for 21. Is having these really inefficient games, and you can just kind of tell, like, he's still working his way back into the flow of things. He's maybe not comfortable or confident with his body yet. And since the All-Star break, it feels like he's back to kind of pre-injury All-Star form. And so obviously, like, when your best player, who's kind of the alpha and the omega of the team, starts playing more efficiently, starts playing more effectively, starts hitting his jumper, starts hitting shots, that's going to lift the entire offense. I think the Magic are also trying to push the pace a little bit more, trying to get out and transition a little bit more, get into their offense a little faster. That's still a bit of a struggle. But the Magic are trying to do a few more things to kind of get themselves going. But a big thing, I think, has just been Paolo has started to look like himself again, which even he would acknowledge.
So since we last spoke, there was news about Jalen Suggs having a procedure on his knee. I'm not sure if it was termed a surgery, but he had some sort of procedure on that knee that's going to keep him out. Where do you think they miss him the most? Is it on the offensive end of the floor, or is it on the defensive end of the floor? I think the thing that Suggs is probably better known for.
I honestly, at the defense, obviously, if you look at the stats, their defense has taken a bit of a nosedive, despite scoring 115 points per 100 possessions over their last 3 games. In each of their last 3 games, they're 1-2. So something's clearly off with the defense. Even against Milwaukee, the defense wasn't Magic defense, but I think a big part of it's just energy. He gives that, Doc Rivers said it really well before the game on Saturday. He and Mo Wagner, who's been out since December, give this team an edge. They're lacking like that intangible thing of bravado, of kind of when you're on the road, playing up to the road crowd, when you're at home, feeding off the home energy. They're just missing this edge that they need to like get over the hump, to answer runs, to not let mistakes compound. Guys that just kind of bring them all together and focus their energy in the right way, or change the energy of a game as needed. That's where they're really missing Jalen Suggs. Defense can still play at a high level. I don't think it'll play ever at the level that it was with Suggs, but they're missing. They're just kind of missing their heart. That's the best way to describe it.
So as we record this, it is late Monday morning. This episode's coming out Monday afternoon. So the Magic are going to play tonight against Houston in a game that, I don't want to call a must win, but every game when you're fighting for positioning the way the Magic are right now does sort of feel like
playing Charlotte. Atlanta's playing somebody else that they can beat. So like it feels like this is a win. This needs to be a win to keep up.
Right. So the Magic are currently in 8th in the Eastern Conference. Atlanta is in 7th, a half game ahead of them. Technically, Orlando and Miami are tied, but the Magic are a couple of winning percentage points ahead of the Heat. And then Chicago is going to finish 10th. Like, that is not a race, but there's a race for positioning between 7, 8, and 9. What do you look at as the thing that you say, okay, if the Magic do blank, they will finish in the 7 or 8 spot and have the opportunity to win one of 2 games, as opposed to finishing in 9th and having to win two play-in games to get into the postseason? What do they need to do to finish in the top 7 or 8?
They need to be resilient. I think that's the big thing that's changed for the Magic over the last few years. They keep telling us they're a tough, resilient team, but over the last 2-3 weeks, every time the Magic get hit with a heavy punch, they kind of crumble. If they get hit repeatedly, they collapse. The Cleveland game is honestly a great example of this. When the Magic played the Cavs, I thought they played a pretty good first half. I exited that first half, was like, the Magic are missing shots, and if they lose the game because they're missing shots, so be it. They're down, 12, 14 points at the half. And I was like, they're playing this team pretty tough. They're making things uncomfortable for them, and they just can't hit shots. So be it. So what? You got to be able to hit shots against a good team like Cleveland. Then Cleveland comes back in the third quarter. I think they got like 2 quick points, and the Magic just couldn't respond anymore. And then things started to snowball and get worse. To lesser extents, that happened throughout the rest of the homestand. Against Golden State, the Magic had a 17-point lead. Steph Curry hits a 3/4 court shot at the buzzer to make it 14, goes on, scores 22 in the third quarter. Team kind of collapses and recovers too late. Against Toronto, have a bad third quarter coming out of the locker room. They go up by 11. Orlando has to rally to get back in. They can't make up the ground in the time that they have left. Same thing in the second game against Toronto. Same thing against Chicago. Just these little things where the Magic are just unable to put teams away. And then when they get hit with a big run, especially in the second half, they struggle to respond. And obviously against a team like Cleveland, when you struggle to respond, when you have like a 2, 3, 4 minute dip, that's when they punish you. That's when they kill you. So I think that for the Magic, the big thing is limiting mistakes, making sure they don't compound, and staying in the game. Give yourself a chance. That's all you can ask for, is to have a shot at the end of the game to win it. And if the Magic do that, they've still got plenty of opportunities ahead of them. They play Atlanta twice in the last week of the season. They still very much control their own destiny to get to the 7-8 game, if not win the whole division.
Were you surprised that the way that the team responded to losing by 40 points to Cleveland? I did go and listen to Locked On Magic after that game, because I was just very interested to see how that team was handling that loss. And I did expect them to come out and play better than they did. And of course, these are close losses. We're talking about 1 possession games, but did you expect them to look different, kind of use that game as a wake-up call?
I did. And I'm sure I wrote that. I'm sure I said that on my pod as well, that I expected to be a wake-up call. And honestly, against Golden State, they had the right response. They punished the Warriors in that first half and to go up 17, and Steph Curry just had a Steph Curry game. Literally, Jamal Mosley said after the game, they got Steph Curry on their side. Like there's nothing else to say about that.
It's a good thing to have.
Yeah. I mean, the Magic just, Paolo can do some of that, but he can't do Steph Curry things.
Right.
I kind of been saying this, it seems, every game. With all the crushing losses, it's always about how you respond next. And I thought the Magic responded well against Golden State. And then they didn't respond as well against Toronto to finish that homestand. They had the 5-game losing streak. They know they dropped the ball at home. They went 1-6 on a 7-game homestand late in the season, which cannot happen. They went on the road and they won. And so it's always interesting to see how they respond next. I think they took some heavy hits. I think they did some soul searching on the plane, and they went out and beat Milwaukee. It was shaky a little bit at the end, but they got the job done. Now we'll see how they finish the rest of this road trip. They're on a 5-game road trip. Cleveland is the last game of that 5-game road trip. So we'll see how everything else shakes out.
It'll be interesting to see 1:00 Sunday on ABC, Cavs Magic for the final time during this regular season. Could playoff matchups be in the future? They very well may, but we will have to wait and see. With that, Philip Rossman-Reich does a great job down at Locked On Magic. Check out his podcast, check out his Patreon, check out Orlando Magic Daily, everything that he does, because he does a great job down there. Philip, thanks so much, man.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, hit that notification bell. Thank you to Adam for joining. Great conversation about the Nets. Thank you to Joe for joining, talking about the Memphis Grizzlies, a team that has not been great lately. And of course, Philip Rossman-Reich, who does a great job down there covering the Orlando Magic. Go check out their podcast as their game against the Cavs approaches to see maybe what other teams think of the Cleveland Cavaliers. But I will be back tomorrow with another edition of Locked On Cavs, talking about the number 1 team in the NBA.